Okay, welcome to my workshop with gallery teachers on teaching lexically. It's good to be here. It's good to have you here, albeit virtually. Let's get started. We've got a lot to cover today. Okay, so I want to start this workshop with Alison. Now, I don't know if you recognize her, but this is Alison from Trainspotting, that massively popular film in the 1990s about heroin addicts in Leith, Edinburgh. So a nice cheery topic to start off with today. So why Alison? Well, in the prequel to Trainspotting, Alison has a moment of what I like to call lexical enlightenment. And it happens to all of us from time to time. Here's when it happens to Alison. We follow Alison throughout her story. And we start noticing that she really likes using a particular phrase. And that phrase is, "That's putting it mildly." She says it all the time, and you really start noticing it after a while. And then finally, after a lot of Alison using this phrase, we get this. She was going to add, "That was putting it mildly," but Kelly had half-jokingly pulled her up for saying that a lot. Okay, so Alison sort of realizes she's using that phrase too much and decides to use it less often. And this has happened to all of us, right? From time to time, we find a phrase we like using and we start overusing it. But why do we do it? Why was Alison using "that's putting it mildly" so much in the first place? Well, she liked it, I guess. So, she started saying it. And what's happening in Alison's head when she uses this phrase, "that's putting it mildly"? Well, is she thinking, okay, so we start with the subject, that, now we need to move on to an auxiliary. Now I'm using the present continuous, so I need to use is, not are, because that is singular. Okay, now for the verb. Good. Now don't forget the ing. Now I want to use an object, but I want to be vague, so let's go for it. That's a good a vague word there. And I want to modify this verb with an adverb at the end. So mild, but with ly because it's an adverb. So mildly, there we go. That's putting it mildly. Done. Is that Alison's thought process? No, it's not. That's not how she's thinking. She just picked the phrase up because she remembers other people saying it. That's putting it mildly in certain situations enough times that she just repeats it. She's not thinking about syntax or even about semantics or anything like that. I mean, why does she say put and not say? She doesn't consider this. That would make more sense, right? What does it refer to? Is she considering that? No, these are not questions she asks. She conceives of this phrase as one large chunk, one large piece. It all belongs together. It's inseparable. And in a way, Alison's moment of lexical enlightenment really illustrates that. When Alison realizes she's been overusing this phrase and decides not to use it, she doesn't decide not to use the present continuous anymore. She doesn't reject the use of adverbs at the ends of sentences. She doesn't decide not to use the verb put anymore. She's just rejecting the whole phrase and just the phrase alone. And she doesn't choose to modify it. She doesn't think, okay, I'm using this phrase too much. Maybe I should mix it up a bit. Maybe I should say, what you says it softly. Or even, that's placing the matter in an understated way for sure. It's that specific collection of words that she drops. That's putting it mildly. That collection of words. That collection of words is completely independent of the grammar that makes it up in Alison's head. And the way I see it, that is the heart of lexical learning. Seeing languages as more than just the sum of their parts, not a system of grammar that we just fill with vocabulary. It's all about taking chunks of language, chunks that sort of stick together, chunks like, that's putting it mildly. As we saw with that's putting it mildly, when we have a chunk of language like this, we can't really change it. That's why that's placing it mildly or that's putting it softly don't work. This phrase is completely fixed. Let's try another one. Happy birthday, a phrase that we all love to hear. But what about enjoyable birthday? Or fun birthday? Or joyful birthday? In terms of syntax and grammar and semantics, these are all correct. This is exactly the same as saying happy birthday, right? They're not wrong, but they are wrong. Okay, and as Michael Lewis, the founder of Lexical Learning, who we're going to hear more from today, he puts it like this. Traditional grammatical knowledge endorsed by Chomsky's idea of competence has concentrated on all the possible sentences of English. More frequently, however, its primary concern must be with sentences which constitute probable utterances. Context and, in particular, cotext make many possible sentences improbable. See what's happening here? Traditionally, we looked at language as a structure of grammar to be filled with vocabulary, thus giving us a system to say anything we can possibly imagine. Anything is possible. This is the sort of Chomskyan paradigm. But when Lewis is saying that, although it's true in theory, it's not enough to master a language, to know a language, to understand a language. We need to also pay attention to what's probable, not just what's possible. So that's placing it softly is possible. Joyful birthday is possible. Excuse me, but do you know how the hour is possible. But that's putting it mildly. Happy birthday and excuse me, but do you have the time is possible and much more probable and much more desirable to teach. Okay. But sure, okay, this is just vocab, right? My examples, that's putting it mildly, and happy birthday are just fixed phrases, that's all. Grammar is still the main feature of language, right? Well, yeah, kind of, but not exactly. Not at least according to lexical learning. Okay, so let's take a look at some more English chunks, and let's decide, are they vocabulary or grammar? And let's see where they fall. These pieces may misbehave a little bit. Let's see how it goes. Okay, so we've got grammar on one side, vocab on the other. Let's look at the word hemoglobin. Okay, hemoglobin. Surely this is vocabulary, right? Okay, there it goes, off into the vocabulary box. Fine, no problem. So far, so good. What about lookout? Okay, yeah, this is kind of grammar, I guess. It's an imperative sentence. Yeah, ooh, grammar. There we go. Lovely. Okay, what about it depends? Well, this is kind of a sentence, isn't it? So surely it's in the grammar spectrum there, kind of there, but not so far in the middle there. Okay, on the beach, surely vocabulary, right? Okay, off it falls into vocabulary. Let's keep going. By the way, this is a fixed phrase, but it has a sort of grammatical function, right? So, yeah, kind of there, isn't it? Have a clear idea of, well, this is a weird one, isn't it? Because it's a collocation, but it's also almost a sentence. And there it falls into a sort of grammatical side. I'll see you later. Surely grammar, grammar, grammar. This is a full sentence with a future form and everything, right? There it is. Okay. Make up your mind. Well, there it goes, in the middle. A few more left. If I were you, okay, this is very grammatical, surely, but is it? It's sort of falling towards the vocabulary side of things here. Have you ever, okay, this is as grammary as it gets, right? Have you ever, present perfect, the most grammary tense ever. Yes and no, which we will see in a minute. I want to talk about Mike Lewis again for a second. Mike Lewis, in his seminal book, The Lexical Approach, rejects the dichotomy of grammar and vocab as two separate things, as you can see in this very messy chart. he basically insists that grammaticality falls on a spectrum with very, very vocabby stuff on one end and very, very grammaticalized stuff on the other. So let's take these phrases and basically put them on Lewis's spectrum. And you have something more like this, not a binary thing, but something more like a spectrum. It's debatable how accurate this list is. I mean, we could argue that I'll see you later may be more grammatical than have you ever, but this is more or less in the right ballpark. We have something like hemoglobin on one side and have you ever on the other. Something very vocabby and very grammatical. But even stuff on the grammatical side, like have you ever and I'll see you later and if I were you, these things can also be looked at from a lexical point of view. So this basically leads Lewis to summarize that language consists of grammaticalized lexis. Basically, this means that language operates on a level of vocabulary with different intensities of grammar. And that, Lewis says, is how we should be teaching our students. We should be teaching structures, not systems. Okay, let's have some good news. If that wasn't good news, this is good news. You already do this. You're already doing this in your class, I'm sure. Think about teaching beginners or elementary students, the beginning of elementary, for example. When you open any beginners or starters or elementary course book, what do you get on the first page of Unit 1? Hello, my name's Roger. What's your name? Hi, I'm Alison. Nice to meet you. Where are you from, Alison? I'm from Gibraltar. You get all this hello, how are you, where are you from stuff. Now, from a grammatical point of view, are our students ready for this yet? Well, no, of course not. They're beginners. They have no grammar. So this must be above level. But do they struggle with this stuff? No, not at all. Everyone understands what's going on here. These are basic greetings. These are phrases we need for these particular situations, meeting people. You know, you do this first lesson, everyone's fine with this. Why? Because you don't need grammar to learn these phrases. From the beginning of learning, our students are already learning lexically. If you've taught beginners from a course book, you've already started teaching lexically. Here are some other phrases that we often teach learners before they understand the grammar. I'll have 2 coffees, please. How are you? How's it going? Where's the toilet? How much is this? Don't speak Turkish. So we often teach these phrases before any of this grammar is actually taught, just as phrases. So since we're already doing it, we're not teaching the grammar, we're just giving our students fixed phrases and they just start using them. Let's see how we can expand on what we're doing and how we can teach more lexically in the classroom. So, today, we're going to look at some lexical approach exercises you can use in the classroom. First, we're going to look at introducing teaching and practicing grammar in a more lexicalized way. We've got 3 little exercises to look at. Then we're going to look at how we can use reading resources to raise awareness and help our students discover the world of chunks, because lexical learning is essentially just about chunks. And finally, we are going to check out how we can improve our learners' listening skills through training them to recognize chunks and understand more when they're listening. Okay, so using the lexical approach to introduce grammar to your students can be painless and really save a lot of headache compared to the more structural, grammatical, mathematical teaching that can sometimes make things more confusing than they need to be. If you've ever had to teach something like reported speech, for example, in a grammatical kind of way, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Something like this, which is terrible on the eyes. Look at that. That's just painful for anyone to look at. Is this a good thing to present to our students? No, don't do this. Introducing this grammar lexically can be much more rewarding and, more importantly, more effective. Okay, so how do we do this? Well, in short, like with the beginner students, we take something they already know and then we grammaticalize it. Here's how we do that. Okay, so introducing grammatical structures. Remember those phrases that students learn at the beginning of the beginner level, those hello, how are you sentences? Well, let's take a look at two of them. Where do you live? I live in Tokyo. Okay, two very simple sentences that the students already know. It's possible the question may not be familiar, so you might want to practice using it a bit with very low levels, but it doesn't take long to pick up this phrase and understand what it means and what kind of function it has. But as we saw before, this is a fairly easy thing for the students to catch on to. They're not thinking analytically, they're just using a set question and answer phrase set. So, first of all, put the question up on the board. And then remove the verb. Elicit verbs from the students, other verbs, and elicit possible answers for these questions. Then get the students to go around, ask each other the questions with these new verbs. Where do you live? Where do you eat? Where do you swim? Where do you work? Where do you go on holiday? Where do you meet friends? Already the students are using the new grammar without any analysis of it at all. They're thinking about it lexically as chunks of functional language, not a system of functional grammar. You may need to scaffold this a little bit with some practice question and answers with the students. This is up to you. You know your students better than anyone. But going from this angle will help them think lexically and focus on the function of of the language, not the grammar. This kind of activity can be done for introducing all sorts of other tenses. It's really simple, right? You just remove a word. And we can do it with lots of things. For example, have you ever been to Athens? We start with a simple question like that. Ask the students, elicit the response, make sure everyone's okay with this sort of question and the answers. You can even ask follow-up questions like, oh, was it good? Did you like it? When did you go? And then once you feel comfortable that the students are comfortable with this, do the removal. Have you ever been to Istanbul, America? My house, the Pera Museum, Bar Italia. And then come the question and answers. And again, just get them to mingle, get them to ask each other the questions. Then the fun part, you can extend this one quite well. Remove even more. And then just have you ever? And this will be more tricky and will be when we get in, this sort of thing is up to you and the scaffolding is all up to you here. You might want to spend some time with verb 3 exercises, eaten and ridden and stuff like this. If you feel the students need more scaffolding on this. But once everyone's okay with the basic concept, which shouldn't take too long, you can again get them to go around making questions, asking each other the questions. These are examples of how a lexical approach can get students using the language straight away without having to analyze the grammar. If you have grammar-y types of students, some students feel more comfortable when they're analyzing grammar. That's fine. They need to do that for closure. You can look at the grammar after they've started using it. Grammar is so much easier and makes so much more sense if you're looking at it once you know how it works. And it's just much more fun and enjoyable to analyze something that you know how to use. Yeah, and you can do this with all sorts of grammar. You can do this with things like, what are you doing? Replace the verb. What are you reading? What are you thinking? What are you making? What are you working on? What are you cooking tonight? Or you can do it with like conditionals. If I were rich, I'd buy a massive house. You can remove the second part. Get them to figure out other verbs for that. You can even remove most of the first part as well and really develop this. You can always draw attention to the way that the patterns are going with the past tense and the would. Again, they don't need to focus very much on the grammar. Maybe a little scaffolding when they need it, but it's just scaffolding. It's not a grammar lesson. Okay, cool. Moving on. I'm sure most, if not all of you, have experience teaching lower levels of English. And if your experience is anything like mine, you'll know that students constantly get tripped up on this whole am, is, do, does thing. And it's fair enough. From the beginning, we have sentences that demand be, like I'm a teacher or he isn't happy. And then a few short modules later, they're introduced to verb sentences. Like I live in Gibraltar, or they don't like chocolate. And this causes confusion. By this stage, they're already primed to say am after I. It's difficult to avoid sentences like I'm like chocolate and do you are a teacher. And that whole am, is, do, does thing just gets really mixed up. It's a very commonly recognized part of second language acquisition. It's kind of a big problem for lower levels. So here's one way I try to solve it. I call it lexical templating. In this example, I'm only going to look at the question form to save time, but obviously you can easily adapt this for positive and negative sentences too. And again, you do this by taking something they already know, and instead of breaking down the grammar and taking the life out of it and analyzing it and cutting it up, you just replace the words. So start with two sentences they probably already know, something they're used to saying, something they always get right. Where do you live? Where are you from? Okay, very, very simple sentences. They probably already know these. Unit 1, lesson 1, listening 1, tape 1, side 1, exercise 1. This has come up. So put these up on the board. Elicit which sentence has an action and which sentence doesn't. Or if you want, you can say which one has a verb, which one doesn't have a verb. Once they feel this distinction between action sentence and non-action sentence, give them the following prompts. We've seen things like this before, right? Very common exercise. But before they actually make the sentences, get them to divide these into action sentences and non-action sentences. Get them to divide them into where do you live type sentences and where are you from type sentences. So hopefully they'll end up with something like this. Okay, you can see where this is going now, right? You know what to do next, right? So get them to form the questions, get them to write the sentences or just say these questions. And then they can also ask each other. But the important thing here is that they are making a distinction, a cognitive distinction between the action sentences and the non-action sentences, but not in a systematic way, more in a lexical way. They're just seeing the shape of the different types of sentences. The templates may come in handy when they're forming these questions because, you know, some of them may still be struggling. And in that's when you remind them of the template sentence. So you've got where do you live? And then you can just remove the question word and the verb, and the student can look at the prompts and make the connection. And hopefully they'll be able to form that question based on this evidence alone. Okay, moving on to the next one. Quick meta note on introducing grammar. When you introduce new grammatical concepts for the first time, try to focus on the function and not the tenses. It's very easy to present grammar as tenses, but it's far more productive to present grammar as a function. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, let's say you're doing a lesson on talking about the future, for example. Do you give them the future forms? Will, going to, continuous, present, simple. Here they are. That's what they look like. How to make them. And then, you know, go for the standard. Will is for spontaneous intentions. Going to and continuous is for planned futures. Present simple for scheduled futures. Yeah, you could do this, but I'd recommend avoiding this abstract mathematical approach as a starting point. Instead, let the students figure it out. Get them to do the work. Let them analyze this. And before we look at examples of how to do that, let's go back to Mike Lewis and see what Mike has to say about this. He's a wealth of information. Okay, so it's worth pointing out, or to remember, that Michael Lewis, in the Lexical Approach, he coins a sort of mantra. So he says the lexical approach totally rejects the present practice produced paradigm advocated within a behaviorist learning model. It is replaced by the observe, hypothesis, experiment, cyclical paradigm. A lot of academic sounding words there, but the most important thing here is this observe, hypothesis, experiment. The students look at what's going on, they make their own hypotheses, and then they experiment with using it. The students just need to use the lexis, not understand how the grammar functions. If they want to see how it works, let it happen after they assimilate it. And it becomes much more satisfying. So you'll need to give them lots of input for this. One way you can do this is let them compare the function of various sentences about the future. So yeah, let's have a look at these next weekend. I'll probably see a few friends. I haven't decided yet though. The concert starts at 8. Let's leave in an hour, yeah? I want to be near the front. Whoop, there goes the bus. Looks like we're walking home. Not now, I'm gonna tell him tomorrow, don't worry. Sorry, I can't do lunch on Thursday. I've been summoned. I'm helping the man upstairs with his new schedule. Wow, so you're really gonna do it? You've got guts. And you need someone to pick the kids up. I'm free next week. I'll do it. This way, you can generate a discussion on the way that we use the future forms, how they change based on function and context. Then they can see why the speaker is using the future, and they can figure out why they're using that particular form. It starts from the context, it starts from the function. Also, added bonus, our learners can see extra stuff going on. Things like, I'll probably, using the time with these present simple schedule forms. Phrases like looks like we're ing, very common structure. Not now, I'm going to blah, blah, blah tomorrow. Again, a sort of lexical pattern. Sorry, I can't blah, 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 blah. I'm doing blah, blah, blah. Again, another lexical pattern, very common. So you're really going to do it? Almost like an expression, isn't it? But it still falls into this sort of grammatical future form. And I'm free next week, I'll do it. I can do this, so I will. Students are people. People with some notable exceptions are generally quite smart. They can figure things out. And as humans, we love finding patterns in things. We love noticing patterns. So let them figure it out. Remember, you can always tell them, you can always give them this direct grammatical solution if they're struggling with this, if they can't really figure it out. But discovery is a very, very powerful way of learning. From here, you can develop these chunks into controlled practice by giving them sort of sentences to finish. Again, still no grammar analysis, just using the language. You could also develop this into a free practice by focusing on the function rather than the grammar. So you can just go for a classic, minimalistic set of questions that would elicit different future forms. And what I like about these sorts of very, very open questions is that it's not pushing them to use a particular future form. That completely depends on their context. What are their plans? Maybe they have no plans. Maybe they do. This will affect the language they use. So they can really experiment with the new language. Okay, moving on. Next one. Reading. It's time to talk about reading. So yeah, at higher levels, it's strongly recommended that learners take advantage of their language skills to figure out the chunks themselves. Again, like I said, discovery is a really good way of learning a language. Learning should become more and more autonomous as it goes on and as the students become more and more advanced. And one of our jobs as teachers is to give our students the tools for them not to need us anymore, basically. And reading is a really, really good place to do this, especially with lexical stuff, lexical learning, the lexical approach, because you have a never-ending supply of text full of natural sounding chunks. There are so many things you can do with texts. So let's look at 6 of them. Okay, I'm going to go through these quite quickly. They're all very short and very simple. So first of all, we can look at raising awareness. You can start with your text. Make sure you've got a text that the students have read. Perhaps you've done some exercises with the text. Maybe it's one you've chosen, or maybe it's from a course book, but there's a text. Now identify the collocations from the text. This is about raising awareness of collocations. Find some collocations from the text, and then after they've read the text, let the students see if they can feel their way around the collocations and feel which ones work and which ones don't. So we have a question like, which one doesn't fit? Main theme, large theme, important theme, central theme, major theme. Well, large theme sounds a bit weird, right? Never-ending supply, bountiful supply, limited supply, maximum supply. One of these is a bit strange. See if they can figure this out. See if they can feel their way around this. Make a workshop, do a workshop, lead a workshop, operate a workshop. Operate a workshop. No one says this. Now, it doesn't matter too much if they can really identify the one that doesn't feel right, but if they can, that's great. It's all about raising awareness about how collocations work. But mainly from the text, they get one collocation, but from this exercise, they get an extra 2 or an extra 3. So yeah, that's one way of raising awareness of collocations. Yes, getting students aware of pattern grammar. So after reading, you can also draw their attention to pattern grammar. So do you remember our Klein with grammar on one side and vocab on the other, the Klein or grammaticality from the beginning of the workshop? Well, pattern grammar falls into this, and it's probably more on the sort of grammatical side of this spectrum, where things get more and more flexible. I see them as sort of flexible phrases. Here are some examples of how you can work with them. So again, after reading a text, find some of these patterns in the text, and then get the students to fill in the gaps with remembering which word was in the text, but also see if they can think of other words to put in. So instead of teaching the phrase to have a strong effect on something, the students are also seeing other collocation, things like having a strong influence, having a strong impact, having a strong focus, having a strong emphasis, and they can see that there are these patterns that are quite common. They told me to try the cake, they asked me to try the cake, they forced me to try the cake, they convinced me to try the cake. Get them to experiment. Everything's about experimentation. By the way, a quick tip, if you want to sort of generate exercises like this yourself, I can strongly recommend using a corpus. English corpus or corpora are really, really great resources for finding out how language naturally works in its collocations and its phrases and flexible phrases and things like this. Yeah, so moving on. General awareness raising. Again, after working on a reading activity, take one sentence from the reading, something that's got quite a lot of juicy chunks in it. So when I was working on this workshop, I just went to my bookshelf and picked up a random book, random page, random sentence. And the second sentence, because the first one was a bit short, the second sentence I saw was full of chunks. There were men and women who'd appeared from nowhere with makeshift vowels who were smoothing over the freshly made craters. I didn't have to look far for this. Random page, random sentence. It just goes to show chunks are really everywhere if you know where to look for them or know how to look for them. Now, you don't want to do the work here. In this exercise, get the students to do it. So give them the sentence and get them to divide it up into chunks. And hopefully they'll have something like appear from nowhere, makeshift shovels, smoothing over freshly made craters. Words that sort of fall together. They sort of stick together, like magnets in a way. And again, you can get them to modify it. You can remove some words and see if they can think of other words, like the last two exercises we looked at. You could turn it into a matching activity. You can do lots of stuff once they've identified the chunks. And when they've identified the chunks, it's theirs. They found them. They have some sort of ownership of these. So you can expand from them. And again, if you want to make exercises like this, use a corpus. And you can find real examples and what's most common, what's least common, what sounds weird, what doesn't. Okay, finally, the last exercise of the reading is the free-form speaking. And it's very simple. It's just a simple process. Highlight some chunks from a reading exercise. Things like, it's time for a quick shower, or I don't like fast food, or the loss caused excruciating pain. This will get your students used to identifying chunks, even if these examples are more lexical. Next up, get the students to find more in the text. See if they can locate the chunks. And then get them to choose 3 and form questions from them. And then, obviously, get them to ask each other the questions. Again, this is very, very simple, but sometimes the simplest things are the best because it means they're doing all the work. And when they're doing all the work, they're discovering things. And when they discover things, they remember better. We don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we make a lesson plan. Okay, moving on to the final part, listening. Okay, so you can also do a similar thing for listening. And I wrote this up in Gallery Teachers in a blog post. And it's up there. You can go and check it out, galleryteachers.com. Navigate to the blog. It's there somewhere. And again, it follows a similar principle of letting the students discover the chunks and the way that chunks work. The difference here is that it's listening. And listening is a nightmare for everyone, including myself. And it's very crucial when you're listening to extended bodies of text that you can pick up chunks, not just words. Listening is a nightmare because when we're reading, we have time. When we're speaking, we have control. When we're writing, we have time and control. But when we're listening, we need to be on the ball and pick up as much information as we can from the fast-moving sounds we're listening to. And that's when chunking can really help. Instead of taking out little individual words and trying to use your cognitive ability to sort of figure out what they mean, if you can pick out several words at once in one chunk, you're using less brain power and you can listen and understand more quickly. This is when chunking can really help. It can really boost listening skills if you treat it as a listening strategy in and of itself. Okay, so here's how it works. Okay, select a listening text. Yeah, of course, we need a listening text. If you're working with a course book, sure, that's great, you'll have a listening text. But if you're not, if you're selecting one yourself, try to get a text with a transcript because for this task, you'll need it. Because step 2 is read the transcript and extract the key chunks from the transcript. So yeah, look through the transcript, try to identify the chunks. It could be collocations, take a walk, for example. It could be discourse markers like on the other hand, or it could be more elaborate lexical phrases like, and that's putting it mildly, or even those more pattern grammar ones, more grammatical ones, it was the first time that she'd seen a green elephant, but it wouldn't be her last. Okay, then give the chunks to the students. Make sure the students have them in front of them on a list. If you're online, just written down on a document, or if you're in person, cut out on pieces of paper, that would be ideal. And they're in front of them there. Have the students discuss what they think the chunks mean. Give feedback. Let everyone sort of have a good idea about what it means. Maybe you'll just give them input and tell them what it means. It all depends. Make sure everyone's on the same page and everyone knows what the chunks mean. Then the students listen to the audio, and when they hear one of the chunks, they pick it up from the table. Or cross it off the list, or delete it from their document. The only aim here is that the students can recognize the chunks when they hear them. It's not a listening exercise for meaning necessarily. It's just so that they can identify the chunks in audio. Following that, have a discussion, ask the students how they felt about the exercise, try to elicit from them how it would have been if they were only listening out for individual words and not chunks. Basically, how much harder it might have been. This will allow them to understand the power of chunking and encourage them to think in chunks when they're listening in the future. This is a tool that they're going to be able to take away with them. You can also use this opportunity to extend the exercise with follow-up activities. You can do word removal stuff, or basically any of the stuff we've looked at throughout this workshop. Once they have chunks, you can do things with the chunks. All of this can be adapted. And if you've already done chunk work with your students before, you can give them the transcript instead, and they can find the chunks themselves. Mix it up any way that you feel your students will benefit the most. Again, like I said, no one knows your students more than you. Okay, so we are drawing to a close, and I just want to give some general tips and afterthoughts. So yes, when you're speaking and communicating with students, particularly on a one-to-one level, new vocab comes up all the time, right? It's just something that's part of the process of spending time with students on their journey through learning English. So when you're kind of giving vocabulary or clarifying the vocabulary, take a look at it. Are they asking you about a word? And is that word part of a bigger phrase? Does it fall into a pattern grammar? See if you can stick more stuff to that individual word. Or if you're introducing new vocabulary to the student, try to think in chunks, not in pieces. They can pick up a phrase, and that will be more useful to them than one word from that phrase. If it's grammatical, try not to break it down and analyze it and turn it into a sort of machine. Get them to sort of see the context of the phrase or the word, or even like the tense, if I dare use such a word, and just see if you can see how it falls into context with them. Don't dive into the grammar. Just give them lots and lots of examples. Where do you live? Where do I sign? Have you ever been to Moscow? The pattern becomes obvious to them if they see it enough. So just give them lots and lots of input. And that leaves me with the takeaway. I'm going to give you a takeaway from Mike Lewis. The combination of rich input and noticing is the key to success in language learning with the lexical approach. The lexical approach is important because it shows our students how to learn a language in a natural and comfortable way. It focuses on how we use the language in the real world, how fluent speakers of English learn their English, and provides those same opportunities to our students. Teachers can really benefit from using the lexical approach, whether you decide to approach your whole term with a lexically based syllabus, or whether you just want to add some elements of lexical teaching into your classroom. Either way, expect to see a positive response from your students as well as some real progress. It's also important because it can have a tremendous impact on your lessons. As a teacher, it can stop you getting bogged down in over-analytical grammatical analysis that feels more like maths and that sends our students to sleep, and instead gives the students a more natural and enjoyable way to learn a new language. The impact of lexically based teaching can have various positive effects on our students' learning. First of all, it can give our students the power to develop their own language learning skills in their own time and give them the ability to look at language in a fresh and inspiring new way. What's more, a lexical approach to English reflects how language works, how fluent speakers think, and how they construct their sentences. So when our students start acquiring language this way, they can end up making more natural, more human sounding and less robotic sounding language straight away. You see the effects immediately. It's great. And the thing I like most about it is that students respond so quickly and comfortably to it, making the classroom a place of discovery and curiosity and less of a torture chamber. Good question. The lexical approach is something both new and experiences can successfully use in the classroom. You don't need to reinvent the wheel, and you don't need to develop any new resources. One of the best things about the lexical approach from a teacher's point of view is that you can take as much or as little of it for what you need in your classroom and what you need with your students. You can totally bring in elements of lexical learning into your communicative language classroom, and it's suitable for both new and experienced teachers to use successfully and with immediate effect.